Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Monday's episode of Trending, brought to you by Iconic Coffee. Head over to shop.iconic.com and use the code TRENDING for 10% off. Well, I'm afraid you're stuck with just me this morning. Gareth is travelling back from Serbia today, so he'll be back with me tomorrow. But for today, let's dive into the news making the headlines. Well, it's been an interesting weekend. Obviously, there's so many different stories going on around the world, some that are constantly evolving, and we're going to start with one of those. So these tariffs, or Trump tariffs as they are called, or being known as, where he's putting massive levies on importing foreign goods into America. Now, the claim is what this will do is it will make American companies and American consumers have to use American warehouses, American workers, and buy American products first rather than overseas because they will be now cheaper. There's some logic to that. When you break it down and put it in simple terms like that, you're encouraging companies in the States to manufacture their products in the States. You're encouraging American consumers to buy American products. Okay, that makes some sense. However, for decades and decades and decades, there has been a pushing of manufacturing over into the Far East, in particular countries such as China. Now, that's clear, very clear. You look at something you're wearing right now. You look at something that you have on your desk right now. You look at something that you have in your car, some random item you may have in your house. It will almost invariably, if you picked up 5 items, 2 or 3 will probably be made in China. However, where this story gets very interesting is when it comes to technology. Because technology and the production of technology, the very kind of high-end types that we're seeing in smartphones, that we see in high-processing computer systems and so on, are invariably produced in the Far East. Countries like Japan, South Korea, and a big one, Taiwan. So by the way that's been done, what that has done is that has created a massive reliance and a massive dependability on those countries for American tech giants to be able to keep functioning, keep producing new products, namely companies such as Apple and so on. Now, to bring all that infrastructure and build that in America to be able to manufacture the same products there, that doesn't happen in 30 seconds because Trump says, we want to bring it home. That takes a long time to build that infrastructure to be able to produce the products at the same level, at the same rate, at the same frequency as the other countries. And this is a story here from a technology expert over in America. The US needs lots of time and money to replace chip imports. Now, computer chips is a really interesting one because most of them are made, the high processing ones are made in Taiwan, which obviously if there was a war in that area, which is very much talked about on the daily, weekly between China and Taiwan, that would obviously throw the supply chain of those massively up in the air, which would cause upheaval for a lot of technology companies. So on one level, you could argue that Trump, by wanting to bring the manufacturing process to America, is a very sensible choice, and it probably is. However, thinking it's going to happen in 5 minutes and the fact you can just chuck these tariffs on people from today is quite frankly insane. Trump says he will announce his tariff plans on imported computer chips this week, telling reporters that we want to make chips and semi-conductors in our country. Okay, as I said, that makes some sense. But one expert has warned about the amount of time, money, and investment needed to achieve that goal. The reality is that semiconductor fabrication plants take years and tens of billions of dollars to build, and the administration knows that. Einstein, this is what the experts called, good name. Einstein adds that would have to be there would be a strong and negative impact on American firms like Apple, as I just mentioned, Microsoft and Nvidia, who I've not heard of. He cites national security and strong demand as a major reason for the US to wanting to push China out of the chip market. Now, again, that might make some sense to have a long-term goal, a long-term ambition, and start putting the groundwork in now to be doing that. Now, I don't hear about that. I hear about just chucking tariffs on countries, which is going to cause chaos from now. The infrastructure, as we just said, as this expert has pointed out, is going to take quite a long time to build. So what happens in the meantime? What happens in that gap between putting the tariffs on and the levies on and your country being in a position to produce these chips? What happens to businesses? What happens to everyday people? What happens to your economy? What happens to your ability to compete? What happens in that period to workers, to jobs, all of those things? That's not the question that the MAGA lot are asking, because that would just, the whole thing falls apart when you start to answer those simple questions. So it's going to be an interesting one to observe over the coming days. It wouldn't shock me if he puts out an exemption on tariffs for these kind of products, because as we talk about regularly on this program, the technological advancement of AI and other technological involvements in human life and society, that's part of the agenda. That's why the world over, they all seem to be on the same page. On the surface, this could potentially derail that slightly in America. It could cause a delay, and it could cause the technology advancement to slow down. That's not what they want. So I would be very surprised if this goes out as it is. I would be very, very surprised if there isn't some kind of exemption which allows these chips to continue being made and continue being imported at a much, much lower tariff, or maybe no tariff at all. Just one to watch, guys. Okay, so Israel was up to its usual tricks, which is destroying large parts of civilian areas. So this story here is from the BBC. Israeli airstrike destroys part of the last fully functioning hospital in Gaza City. An Israeli airstrike has destroyed part of the Ali Arab Hospital, the last fully functioning hospital in Gaza City. Witnesses said the strike destroyed the intensive care and surgery departments of the hospital. Videos posted online, which you'll see here, appeared to show huge flames and smoke rising after missiles hit the two-story building. People, including some patients still in hospital beds, were filmed rushing away from the scene. Now, as usual, Israel's come out and said, look, this is not our intention to harm civilians. No, but you seem to be very good at it. And that they were given, they gave prior warning of the attacks. Well, this story says here that patients and displaced people must go to a safe distance, is what the warning said. You have 20 minutes. So I'm just going to put it out there. If you're in intensive care, if you're in a hospital bed for whatever reason, you're probably not that mobile. You're probably not that quick on your feet. You probably don't have the ability to get up and get out within 20 minutes. And especially if you've got people in intensive care, people who might be strapped up to life support machines, oxygen, so many different things like that. Probably not going to, 20 minutes is not going to cut it, is it? Plus, if you received a note like that, that would spark absolute panic and chaos, and nobody does anything quickly when they're in panic and chaos. Everything would be rushing around, and as a result, clearly, people didn't get out, and that's why people have been killed. So I heard a great analogy the other week, right, to do with the way that Israel were going ahead. And the fact that a lot of the MAGA lot, or the MIGA lot, Make Israel Great Again, seem to be defending it, and seem to be saying that they have the right to defend themselves, they have the right to do this, the right to do that. Well, this analogy sums it up pretty clearly. Right, let's say somebody, to use the analogy, the first person in the story is Hamas, October 7th, if you believe the official story. The second person in the story is the Israeli military, the IDF. Someone comes into your house and harms 2 or 3 members of your family, kills 2 or 3 members of your family. Okay? You then want to go and get that person back, right? Okay, there's an argument that's logical. You know that person lives in a 3-story building with other families, with other people, elderly people, young people, innocent civilians. Rather than you going into that house and targeting the person who you know has harmed your family, you just blow up the whole building. What would you be then? Well, you'd be a mass murderer, wouldn't you? Because you couldn't use the argument of, yeah, but the person I wanted to kill was in there. The other people just, they got in the way. You couldn't use that argument. But that's basically what Israel are doing. They're claiming that this happened on October 7th, and I'm not disputing the fact that people died. I'm not disputing that. I'm disputing the way that it happened and was allowed to happen. Then all of a sudden, the retaliation is to just target anyone, which is what's happening. Hence why, if you fire rockets and missiles at 3, 4, 5-story apartment buildings or 2-story hospital buildings, you know full well there is civilians and families in there. So all of a sudden, you cannot claim you are defending yourself. You cannot claim you are targeting terrorists and terrorist infrastructure and trying to keep civilian casualties at a minimum. You cannot claim that anymore. However, they still do. And what's more pathetic is a lot of the media parrots still say that. They still hold that argument. A lot of the MIGA lot, who just will defend Israel for literally anything and everything, still use that argument that they're targeting terrorists. Well, how? How can you keep a straight face and make that claim based on that point I've just made? The simple answer is you can't. The only way that you can stand and defend the actions of Israel at this point is if you are deeply, deeply, deeply mentally disturbed and sinister. The way that they have been indiscriminately bombing and now this increased ground invasion, on top of that, the talks of taking over Gaza, which was always the plan all along. It was so obvious, and anyone that didn't see it at the start, well, I'm sure you're seeing it now. And are you going to go back and own the fact that you called it wrong? Probably not. Easier to double down on the loser, isn't it, than admit you were wrong. It's so clear what's happening. It's so clear what the plan was all along. Take Gaza to the point that is irreparable. It is a mess, a wasteland. You've got millions of displaced people. You've got no infrastructure at all. Everything is rubble. There's no homes. There's no hospitals. There's nothing for people there's nowhere for people to live. That's part of the agenda. Creative destruction. Create something and completely destroy it to bring about the change that you want. And it's very clear, as we've seen from that absolutely insane AI generated video that Trump posted, it's very clear to see what they want to happen next. Whether it happens next, well, a lot of that comes down to the public support that garners. And you're talking about a president in America who claims to be America first but seems to care more about Israel, and many people are starting to point that out, even avid supporters of him. And you've got a prime minister in Israel who is incredibly unpopular even within his own people, and there's an arrest warrant out for him. So public support or public pushback will have a massive impact, I think, on where this story goes. But the point is, for today, once again, another terrorist attack by the IDF that goes basically unchecked when it comes to the international order. Completely unchecked. If this was Russia doing this, everyone would be up in arms. If you've got to, and I've said this all the time, if you've got to look at who is doing something before deciding whether you support or you oppose it, you've lost the plot. If murder is wrong, murder is wrong. It doesn't matter who's doing it. Right, these two stories are intertwined. We're going to come back to the UK here because these two stories are very, very important. We've talked a lot about two-tier policing, about the fact that there has been a constant poking in the chest of the sort of indigenous white population here in the UK. Well, these two stories, both from today, very much point that out. So in the NHS, so the National Health Service, or the No Hope Service, as they should be called, because it's an absolute car crash, slow motion. NHS places non-white CVs at the front of the queue when trying to fill a role. Now, we'll dive into that story in a second, but I pointed this out at the back end of last week on a similar story to do with a different sector, which is that you could apply the argument I just made about if you've got to look at who's doing something before deciding whether you support or oppose it, you've lost the plot. If you've got to look at what somebody looks like before deciding whether they should be given a job, rather than just looking at their ability to do the job, you've absolutely lost the plot. And in a health service, when you literally have people's lives in your hands, that argument is even more important and even more appropriate. NHS trusts have been prioritising black and ethnic minority applicants on interview shortlists in line with NHS England guidance. So you're putting in writing then, because guidance would be obviously in writing, it would be sent out to the various different trusts. You're putting in writing then your prejudice. You're putting in writing your discrimination. So that's good. At least then that you can take that to court because they've written it down. Official documents recommend recruiters use the Rooney Rule, a policy from American football saying that those of ethnic minorities must be shortlisted for interviews if they apply. Liverpool Women's NHS Foundation Trust, for example, has said it has used positive discrimination in this way when narrowing down candidates for interview. So at least they use the word discrimination. They do admit it openly. The administrative body managing England's health services has also said managers must justify hiring white nationals. Surely just justify hiring the best person for the job. The only time really a hiring official should be asked a question about why they chose a person is if that person is incompetent, if that person is useless, and if that person makes mistakes which cost lives in this case. That's when the hiring officer should be asked some questions. They should never be asked some questions based on who they hire and how, in terms of how they look. That is so backwards. We used to have a situation, I say we, the universal we, used to have a situation in America where you had segregation. You had segregation of races. You had segregation of skin colors. That was absolutely insane because that was literally treating people differently based on the color of their skin, which is absolutely insane and wrong. Well, to me, you're taking what clearly was insane and wrong, and we look back at now with disgust at how that was ever allowed to happen, and you're doing a very similar thing. You're bringing it back round, but at this time you're calling it positive. This time you're calling it positive discrimination, a Rooney Rule. You're giving it a fancy name to make it sound like it's some glamorous thing that we should all be proud of. It's persecution, it's discrimination. And when it comes to health, now I don't believe the NHS has any interest in your health. Some of the people within it may do, but the people at the top, the people funding it, the people that they're in bed with in the terms of the drug companies and so on, they couldn't give two about your health. They want a customer for life. They want money. And that's why we're seeing so many people become dependent on drugs for life. Anyway, that's another story. But in health, it's more important than ever to get the right person in the right position. Because you make mistakes, you can cost someone their life. If you're doing a C-section on a pregnant woman, right in a very dangerous scenario, you could cost 2 lives. You're doing a heart bypass and a surgery, you could cost someone some life. You misdiagnose somebody with something, you can cost them their life. It's clear that hiring based on how you look and where you come from doesn't work. That's discrimination, complete discrimination. But doing that in a healthcare setting where mistakes are literally going to cost lives, and you're going to have situations where that happens because you're going to promote people that are not qualified because they're there to tick a box, essentially, which is embarrassing for them as well. Because imagine being in a job going, am I here because of how I look? Or am I here because I was the best person? And this story kind of intertwines with that, which is, if you remember the after the Southport attacks a couple of years ago, there was, last year, there was a lot of talk of two-tier policing, how police were dealing with ethnic minorities differently to how they were dealing with, the rioters. Well, there's been a report done by the Home Affairs Committee, and they've examined the police response to the riots that broke out after that attack. And there's no evidence, guys, of two-tier policing, so don't worry. Don't worry about the fact that the Home Office, so that the people in charge of, essentially, when you break it down, the police, they've investigated themselves and they found that they've done nothing wrong. I don't know about you, but I always find when people that are accused of something investigate themselves for what they've been accused of, it very rarely says they've ever done anything wrong. Just point out there. It's very clear there's a two-tier policing system in this country. It's very clear there's a two-tier justice and prison system in this country. Now, I'm not one of those, white British nationalists in any way, shape or form that thinks that we need to do X, Y and Z. And, I don't support any of that whatsoever. I just want everyone to be treated fairly and everyone to be treated equally, and the colour of their skin and their religious ideology to have nothing to do with the punishment that is put upon them. Their actions, their behaviour, that should be the deciding factor in how you are treated and how you are dealt with when it comes to the legal system. If you're going to stand and blow up cars in the street, I don't care if you're black, white, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, I couldn't give two. That's wrong. Completely wrong. If you're going to be violent, if you're going to be a thug, if you're going to harm people, that's wrong. Whatever your skin colour and ideologies may be. I just want people to be treated fairly. That's all I want. Really simple. If people are going to behave in a certain way that goes against the law and against the values, they should be dealt with in exactly the same way than if I did it, for example. But that's not what we have seen. That's not what we have seen. And it's very, very clear that by doing this and by making it so obvious, that you are ignoring it and doing nothing about it, as me and Gareth and Rich have spoken about on previous episodes, you're just poking people in the chest. You're poking people in the chest constantly. That annoying prod of, for goodness sake, again. Again, when is someone going to do something about this? Well, what happens eventually if someone keeps poking you is you just lose the plot. That's what happens, and then you retaliate, which is what happened in Southport. It's what happened after Southport. A lot of pent-up frustration and anger at the way that this has been going came out in people, and it did not come out in the right way in any way, shape or form. I do not condone what happened in terms of violence, attacks on hotels. That was just absolutely immoral as well. But the frustration and the anger and the resentment within people, that's very real. Because I feel that myself. I have seen the country that I grew up in change significantly from a country where, particularly where I grew up, and particularly, where I live now here in Derby, that felt really safe, that felt really together. There was a sense of community. That's not there now. And that's not just because of what I'm talking about here. There's a lot of factors for that. There's a lot of factors in why young people in general are not of the same mindset and are changing not for the better, and why there's violence on the streets. But one of the keys, I think, is the connection between the police, the authorities, and the population. That is completely gone. That divide is completely gone. Most people fear the police. They don't respect the police. They either don't care about what they say or do at all, which is what leads to the violence that we have seen, or they're terrified of them, terrified of any interaction with them. They wouldn't go to them for help or support. They wouldn't go to them to try and solve a matter. Neither of those work at all. For there to be a safe society, for there to, the police need to be respected, and the reason they need to, and in order to get the respect, they need to respect the population. That's how it works. Respect is a two-way street. If you just command authority, then people are not going to respect you. They're going to fear you. That's completely different. If the police showed respect and care for the people that they are supposedly there to keep safe, and treated everybody fairly and treated everybody equally, then in return, they would get respect back from the population. Yes, there'd be a few idiots, of course. That's always going to happen. You're probably never going to get away from that. But the vast majority would be respectful if the vast majority of the police were respectful in return. Vast majority of politicians, whether that's local councillors, whether that's MPs, whether that's prime ministers, whether that's civil servants, were respectful back and understood that they work for us and that they are there to make the country the best it can be for the benefit of the people they are elected to represent. Imagine that dynamic. It would be completely different to the one that we have right now. But obviously this is completely done by design. But the fact that this investigation here has quite openly said, there's no evidence of two-tier policing. And this is from Sky News, but this story is right around the country today on the various different news outlets. So it's something that everybody is going to be reading. It just furthers that disconnect between the authorities and the people, because everyone with their everyday real life experience are looking around going, well, I can see there is a two-tier justice system. I can see there is two-tier policing, two-tier culture. You're cancelling, as we mentioned last week, you're cancelling Remembrance Day parades while having Eid and Ramadan ceremonies. You can't do one without the other. There's cancelling Easter and harvest ceremonies in schools and churches, particularly in schools, but at the same time, they will host Diwali festivals. You can't have one without the other. If you're going to have diversity and you're going to have multiculturalism and respect for different cultures, then have respect for every culture. Have respect for every ideology, every religious belief. You can't have one. When you're cherry picking, that's not diversity. That's not inclusion. That's the exact opposite. That's exclusion. And that's discrimination, which is what we're seeing. And constantly, when you see stories like this and you read headlines like this, as I said, it's poking and poking and poking even more, to the point that people are going, I don't recognise this country anymore. I don't feel like I'm at home in my own country anymore. People are saying that, and they are saying that with validity. The way that many people are reacting to that, and the way that many people are looking for answers to that, the answers that are being given to them, I don't believe are the right ones. But it's very clear that if you want a population to be at war with each other, you need to constantly divide them. When, as we've said so many times, the enemy that we all have, the common enemy that we all have, is trying to enslave us all. So what's the point in ignoring that, essentially, and fighting each other when we're both in the gun sights of that? As they said, when everybody says look left and look right, look up. Who's pulling the strings on both sides? Who's controlling the narrative of both sides? Who's telling, women that men are toxic? Who's telling men, that women just want their money? Oh, well, they're at war with each other immediately. Who's telling Muslims that everyone that's white doesn't like them? Who's telling everybody that's white that Muslims are all terrorists? All of those things, they're dividing. When really, if you just break it down to a human level, most of us will get on. We might disagree on certain things, and that's fine. The world would be very dull if we all thought the same. But as long as we come back to that key word, respect, we have respect for each other, and that's the foundation. We start with, what do we have in common? We start there. The world would look very different, and it would look very, very different incredibly quickly. Because at the moment, that's the last thing that's looked at. It's what do we differ on? What do we disagree on? What don't we like about each other? That's most people's point one. And you very rarely get any further on than that. And that is why the population worldwide has been pretty much at war with each other for centuries, I would suggest. Certainly amplified in the last few decades. And war at each other over so many different things, whether it's gender wars, or it's religious wars, income bracket wars, sexuality wars, whatever it is. Football team bloody wars in some cases. Start with what we have in common. If we did that, the world would change quite literally overnight. Quite literally overnight. And that is something, and it sounds really simplistic, that the cult are absolutely terrified of. Because if that happens, where does their power go? Their power is in the disunity. Their power is in the segmentation of society, in the fact that people won't talk to each other. People don't like each other. That is what their power is in. It's very simple. Divide and rule. It's the oldest trick in the book, and it's worked. And as we've spoken about before, if the tactic works, they're just going to keep doing it, rinse and repeat, and that's exactly what they're doing. And more so now than ever before are they using even more finite fault lines to divide people. I've said it many times through today's episode. I just want people to be treated fairly, people to be treated equally, and to have respect for each other for whatever our beliefs are, and respect to live your life how you choose to live it, as long as you don't impose that on anybody else that doesn't feel or believe the same as you. Simplistic, you might call me an idealist, but it's very, very doable. And the world will change quite literally overnight if we were to do that on any kind of collective scale. Even if you just did that in your local village, your local town, your local street, your local pub, bit by bit by bit by bit, that would change. That would then start to fester out. That would start to leak into other things that would look at you and go, hang on, these guys seem to be getting it right. Everyone's getting on. The streets are safe. People seem to be happy. People are loving and supporting each other. People are taking care of each other. Imagine a world like that. Imagine a world where we could sit here every morning and talk about, this has just happened. This is incredible. Look at this moment of unity between these people, rather than essentially the devastation and destruction of the world that we talk about, which is dark, but we need to talk about it because we need to point out that these things are happening. Living in ignorance, living in, thinking everything's bliss and that we're winning is what's going to guarantee a defeat. Identifying the problem, looking at a solution, and being proactive to make that change yourself, and then collectively inspiring others to do the same. That's the only way we get out of this mess. And I don't know about you, but I feel like we've deliberated about it long enough, and it's time to start walking the walk and making this happen. Well, thank you very much for tuning in with me this morning. I'll be back with Gareth tomorrow morning, where we'll be diving into some more stories. Head over to shop.iconic.com and use the code TRENDING for 10% off if you want to try our range of Iconic coffee. And we're just 4 days to go until our second Iconic Live, which is this Friday, Good Friday, in Sutton Coldfield, just outside Birmingham. There's still some last tickets available. We'll put the link to those in the description of this episode as well. It'll be great to see as many of you there as possible. Doing stuff like this online is amazing, but meeting people in person and being able to share stories and shake people's hands and give people hugs who are giving us support is a really incredible thing to do, and I love that more than anything, really. So hopefully we'll see as many of you there as possible. So thank you very much for tuning in. As I said, have a fantastic first day of the week, and we'll be back tomorrow.